drunk, and speak parrot, and squabble, swagger the swear, and discourse fustian with one's own shadow? Othello. I have already told you, my dear Tresham, what probably was no news to you, that my principal fault was an unconquerable pitch of pride, which exposed me to frequent mortification. I had not even whispered to myself that I loved Diana Vernon, yet no sooner did I hear Rashleigh talk of her as a prize which he might stoop to carry off, or neglect, at his pleasure, than every step which the poor girl had taken, in the innocence and openness of her heart, to form a sort of friendship with me, seemed in my eyes the most insulting coquetry. So she would secure me as a peacealler, I suppose, in case Mr. Rashleigh Osbaldistone should not take compassion upon her. But I will satisfy her that I am not a person to be trepanned in that manner. I will make her sensible that I see through her arts, and that I scorn them. I did not reflect for a moment that all this indignation, which I had no right whatever to entertain, proved that I was anything but indifferent to Miss Vernon's charms, and I sate down to table in high ill humour with her and all the daughters of Eve. Miss Vernon heard me, with surprise, return ungracious answers to one or two playful strokes of satire which she threw out with her usual freedom of speech, but, having no suspicion that offence was meant, she only replied to my rude repartees with jests somewhat similar, but polished by her good temper, though pointed by her wit. At length she perceived I was really out of humour, and answered one of my rude speeches thus: "They say, Mr. Frank, that one may gather sense from fools. I heard Cousin Wilfred refuse to play any longer at cudgels the other day with Cousin Thorny, because Cousin Thorny got angry, and struck harder than the rules of amicable combat, it seems, permitted. Were I to break your head in good earnest, quoth honest Wilfred, I care not how angry you are, for I should do it so much the more easily, but it's hard I should get raps over the costard, and only pay you back in make-believes. Do you understand the moral of this, Frank? I have never felt myself under the necessity, madam, of studying how to extract the slender portion of sense with which this family season their conversation." Necessity. And madam, you surprise me, Mr. Osbaldistone. I am unfortunate in doing so. Am I to suppose that this capricious tone is serious? Or is it only assumed, to make your good humor more valuable? You have a right to the attention of so many gentlemen in this family, Miss Vernon, that it cannot be worth your while to inquire into the cause of my stupidity and bad spirits. What, she said, am I to understand, then, that you have deserted my faction, and gone over to the enemy? Then, looking across the table, and observing that Rashleigh, who was seated opposite, was watching us with a singular expression of interest on his harsh features, she continued: "Horrible thought, now I see 'tis true, for the grim-visaged Rashleigh smiles on me, and points at thee for his. Well, thank heaven, and the unprotected state which has taught me endurance, I do not take offence easily, and that I may not be forced to quarrel, whether I like it or no, I have the honor, earlier than usual, to wish you a happy digestion of your dinner in your bad humor." And she left the table accordingly. Upon Miss Vernon's departure, I found myself very little satisfied with my own conduct. I had hurled back offered kindness, of which circumstances had but lately pointed out the honest sincerity, and I had but just stopped short of insulting the beautiful, and, as she had said with some emphasis, the unprotected being by whom it was proffered. My conduct seemed brutal in my own eyes. To combat or drown these painful reflections, I applied myself more frequently than usual to the wine which circulated on the table. The agitated state of my feelings combined with my habits of temperance to give rapid effect to the beverage. Habitual topers, I believe, acquire the power of soaking themselves with a quantity of liquor that does little more than muddy those intellects which in their sober state are none of the clearest, but men who are strangers to the vice of drunkenness as a habit, are more powerfully acted upon by intoxicating liquors. My spirits, once aroused, became extravagant. I talked a great deal, argued upon what I knew nothing of, told stories of which I forgot the point, then laughed immoderately at my own forgetfulness. I accepted several bets without having the least judgment. I challenged the giant John to wrestle with me, although he had kept the ring at Hexham for a year, and I never tried so much as a single fall. My uncle had the goodness to interpose and prevent this consummation of drunken folly, which, I suppose, would have otherwise ended in my neck being broken. It has even been reported by maligners that I sung a song while under this vinous influence, but, as I remember nothing of it, and never attempted to turn a tune in all my life before or since, I would willingly hope there is no actual foundation for the calumny. I was absurd enough without this exaggeration. Without positively losing my senses, I speedily lost all command of my temper, and my impetuous passions whirled me onward at their pleasure. I had sate down sulky and discontented, and disposed to be silent. The wine rendered me loquacious, disputatious, and quarrelsome. I contradicted whatever was asserted, and attacked, without any respect to my uncle's table, both his politics and his religion. The affected moderation of Rashleigh, which he well knew how to qualify with irritating ingredients, was even more provoking to me than the noisy and bullying language of his obstreperous brothers. My uncle, to do him justice, endeavored to bring us to order, but his authority was lost amidst the tumult of wine and passion. At length, frantic at some real or supposed injurious insinuation, I actually struck Rashleigh with my fist. No Stoic philosopher, superior to his own passion and that of others, could have received an insult with a higher degree of scorn. What he himself did not think it apparently worth while to resent, Thorncliff resented for him. Swords were drawn, and we exchanged one or two passes, when the other brothers separated us by main force, and I shall never forget the diabolical sneer which writhed Rashleigh's wayward features, as I was forced from the apartment by the main strength of two of these youthful titans. They secured me in my apartment by locking the door, and I heard them, to my inexpressible rage, laugh heartily as they descended the stairs. I essayed in my fury to break out, but the window grates, and the strength of a door clenched with iron, resisted my efforts. At length I threw myself on my bed, and fell asleep amidst vows of dire revenge to be taken in the ensuing day. But with the morning cool repentance came. I felt, in the keenest manner, the violence and absurdity of my conduct, and was obliged to confess that wine and passion had lowered my intellects even below those of Wilfred Osbaldistone, whom I held in so much contempt. My uncomfortable reflections were by no means soothed by meditating the necessity of an apology for my improper behavior, and recollecting that Miss Vernon must be a witness of my submission. The impropriety and unkindness of my conduct to her personally added not a little to these galling considerations, and for this I could not even plead the miserable excuse of intoxication. Under all these aggravating feelings of shame and degradation, I descended to the breakfast hall, like a criminal to receive sentence. It chanced that a hard frost had rendered it impossible to take out the hounds, so that I had the additional mortification to meet the family, excepting only Rashleigh and Miss Vernon, in full divan, surrounding the cold venison pasty and chine of beef. They were in high glee as I entered, and I could easily imagine that the jests were furnished at my expense. In fact, what I was disposed to consider with serious pain, was regarded as an excellent good joke by my uncle, and the greater part of my cousins. Sir Hildebrand, while he rallied me on the exploits of the preceding evening, swore he thought a young fellow had better be thrice drunk in one day, than sneak sober to bed like a Presbyterian, and leave a batch of honest fellows, and a double quart of claret. And to back this consolatory speech, he poured out a large bumper of brandy, exhorting me to swallow a hair of the dog that had bit me. Never mind these lads laughing, Nevoy, he continued, they would have been all as great milksops as yourself, had I not nursed them, as one may say, on the toast and tankard. Ill-nature was not the fault of my cousins in general. They saw I was vexed and hurt at the recollections of the preceding evening, and endeavored, with clumsy kindness, to remove the painful impression they had made on me. Thorncliff alone looked sullen and unreconciled. This young man had never liked me from the beginning, and in the marks of attention occasionally shown me by his brothers, awkward as they were, he alone had never joined. If it was true, of which, however, I began to have my doubts, that he was considered by the family, or regarded himself, as the destined husband of Miss Vernon, a sentiment of jealousy might have sprung up in his mind from the marked predilection which it was that young lady's pleasure to show for one whom Thorncliff might, perhaps, think likely to become a dangerous rival. Rashleigh at last entered, his visage as dark as morning weed brooding, I could not but doubt, over the unjustifiable and disgraceful insult I had offered to him. I had already settled in my own mind how I was to behave on the occasion, and had schooled myself to believe that true honor consisted not in defending, but in apologizing for, an injury so much disproportioned to any provocation I might have to allege. I therefore hastened to meet Rashleigh, and to express myself in the highest degree sorry for the violence with which I had acted on the preceding evening. No circumstances, I said, could have wrung from me a single word of apology, save my own consciousness of the impropriety of my behavior. I hoped my cousin would accept of my regrets so sincerely offered, and consider how much of my misconduct was owing to the excessive hospitality of Osbaldistone Hall. "He shall be friends with thee, lad," cried the honest knight, in the full effusion of his heart, "or deep enemy, if I call him son more. Why, Rashie, dost stand there like a log? Sorry for it is all a gentleman can say, if he happens to do anything awry, especially over his claret. I served in Hounslow, and should know something, I think, of affairs of honor. Let me hear no more of this, and we'll go in a body and rummage out the badger in Birkenwood Bank." Rashleigh's face resembled, as I have already noticed, no other countenance that I ever saw. But this singularity lay not only in the features, but in the mode of changing their expression. Other countenances, in altering from grief to joy, or from anger to satisfaction, pass through some brief interval, ere the expression of the predominant passion supersedes entirely that of its predecessor. There is a sort of twilight, like that between the clearing up of the darkness and the rising of the sun. While the swollen muscles subside, the dark eye clears, the forehead relaxes and expands itself, and the whole countenance loses its sterner shades, and becomes serene and placid. Rashleigh's face exhibited none of these gradations, but changed almost instantaneously from the expression of one passion to that of the contrary. I can compare it to nothing but the sudden shifting of a scene in the theatre, where, at the whistle of the prompter, a cavern disappears, and a grove arises. My attention was strongly arrested by this peculiarity on the present occasion. At Rashleigh's first entrance, black he stood as night. With the same inflexible countenance he heard my excuse and his father's exhortation, and it was not until Sir Hildebrand had done speaking, that the cloud cleared away at once, and he expressed, in the kindest and most civil terms, his perfect satisfaction with the very handsome apology I had offered. "Indeed," he said, "I have so poor a brain myself, when I impose on it the least burden beyond my usual 3 glasses, that I have only, like honest Cassio, a very vague recollection of the confusion of last night, remember a mass of things, but nothing distinctly, a quarrel, but nothing wherefore. So, my dear cousin," he continued, shaking me kindly by the hand, "conceive how much I am relieved by finding that I have to receive an apology, instead of having to make one. I will not have a word said upon the subject more. I should be very foolish to institute any scrutiny into an account, when the balance, which I expected to be against me, has been so unexpectedly and agreeably struck in my favor. You see, Mr. Osbaldistone, I am practicing the language of Lombard Street, and qualifying myself for my new calling." As I was about to answer, and raised my eyes for the purpose, they encountered those of Miss Vernon, who, having entered the room unobserved during the conversation, had given it her close attention. Abashed and confounded, I fixed my eyes on the ground, and made my escape to the breakfast table, where I heard it among my busy cousins. My uncle, that the events of the preceding day might not pass out of our memory without a practical moral lesson, took occasion to give Rashleigh and me his serious advice to correct our milksop habits, as he termed them, and gradually to inure our brains to bear a gentlemanlike quantity of liquor, without brawls or breaking of heads. He recommended that we should begin piddling with a regular quart of claret per day, which, with the aid of March beer and brandy, made a handsome competence for a beginner in the art of toping. And for our encouragement, he assured us that he had known many a man who had lived to our years without having drunk a pint of wine at a sitting, who yet, by falling into honest company, and following hearty example, had afterwards been numbered among the best good fellows of the time, and could carry off their 6 bottles under their belt quietly and comfortably, without brawling or babbling, and be neither sick nor sorry the next morning. Sage as this advice was, and comfortable as was the prospect it held out to me, I profited but little by the exhortation, partly, perhaps, because, as often as I raised my eyes from the table, I observed Miss Vernon's looks fixed on me, in which I thought I could read grave compassion blended with regret and displeasure. I began to consider how I should seek a scene of explanation and apology with her also, when she gave me to understand she was determined to save me the trouble of soliciting an interview. "Cousin Francis," she said, addressing me by the same title she used to give to the other Osbaldistones, although I had, properly speaking, no title to be called her kinsman, "I have encountered this morning a difficult passage in the Divina Commedia of Dante. Will you have the goodness to step to the library and give me your assistance? And when you have unearthed for me the meaning of the obscure Florentine, we will join the rest at Birkenwood Bank, and see their luck at unearthing the badger." I signified, of course, my readiness to wait upon her. Rashleigh made an offer to accompany us. "I am something better skilled," he said, "at tracking the sense of Dante through the metaphors and elisions of his wild and gloomy poem, than at hunting the poor inoffensive hermit yonder out of his cave." "Pardon me, Rashleigh," said Miss Vernon, "but as you are to occupy Mr. Francis's place in the counting-house, you must surrender to him the charge of your pupil's education at Osbaldistone Hall. We shall call you in, however, if there is any occasion, so pray do not look so grave upon it. Besides, it is a shame to you not to understand field sports. What will you do should our uncle in Crane Alley ask you the signs by which you track a badger?" True, said Sir Hildebrand, with a sigh. "I misdoubt Rashleigh will be found short at the leap when he is put to the trial. And he would ha learned useful knowledge like his brothers. He was bred up where it grew, I was, but French antics, and book learning, with the new turnips, and the rats, and the Hanoverians, ha changed the world that I ha known in old England. But come along with us, Rashie, and carry my hunting staff. Man, thy cousin lacks none of thy company as now, and I wanna ha die crossed. It's ne'er be said there was but one woman in Osbaldistone Hall, and she died for lack of her will." Rashleigh followed his father, as he commanded, not, however, ere he had whispered to Diana, "I suppose I must in discretion bring the courtier, ceremony, in my company, and knock when I approach the door of the library?" No, Rashleigh," said Miss Vernon, "dismiss from your company the false archimage dissimulation, and it will better ensure your free access to our classical consultations." So saying, she led the way to the library, and I followed, like a criminal, I was going to say, to execution, but, as I bethink me, I have used the simile once, if not twice before. Without any simile at all, then, I followed, with a sense of awkward and conscious embarrassment, which I would have given a great deal to shake off. I thought it a degrading and unworthy feeling to attend one on such an occasion, having breathed the air of the continent long enough to have imbibed the notion that lightness, gallantry, and something approaching to well-bred self-assurance, should distinguish the gentleman whom a fair lady selects for her companion in a tete-a-tete. My English feelings, however, were too many for my French education, and I made, I believe, a very pitiful figure, when Miss Vernon, seating herself majestically in a huge elbow chair in the library, like a judge about to hear a cause of importance, signed to me to take a chair opposite to her, which I did, much like the poor fellow who was going to be tried, and entered upon conversation in a tone of bitter irony.